Hey everyone, this time on Tim Talks Audio, we're checking out the FX Collection 2 from Arturia. So plugin manufacturers Arturia have recently released FX Collection 2, which is all of their effects plugins in one bundle. It's everything that they make currently available to you at one set price. And with this, they've actually released 3 new plugins: Comp Diode 609, Bus Force, and EQ Sitral-295. Today we're going to be taking a look at these 3 newest plugins from them and seeing what they can actually do. So let's dive into the DAW and take a listen to these new plugins. So here we are inside of our session, and immediately you can see, now I've increased the size so that it's easier for you guys, but here it is. Here is the first of the 3 plugins we're going to go over, and that's Comp Diode 609. You can see what compressor this is based off of. It's a 609 compressor from Neve. That was the 33609. This is the Diode 609. It's now available to us, and all of the controls of the hardware are here: the compressor section on the left, the limiter section in the middle, and the meters on the right hand side. Conveniently enough, there is a mix knob right in front as well. Then Arturia actually gives you the advanced section, which is another set of controls that aren't necessarily available on the original hardware units. Something like a look ahead for your compressor, being able to set the external side chain and do some side chain compression with this. Also doing some side chain EQ of the internal side chain in this middle section here, and being able to listen to the sounds that you're focusing on with that side chain. Putting the advanced controls away, we're just going to look at the bottom where we can see a few different controls. We have step controls, and this is just an on-off button, so that like the hardware, all of the controls up here are at set increments. But if we turn this off, we can go in between. Maybe you don't need 2 dB of makeup gain. You only need 1.5. If you turn off step controls, you can then go in and fine-tune that makeup gain or any other parameter. Next to that is your post limiter makeup gain. Following that is just an overall bypass for the unit, but there's a couple of these, and in Studio One you can just bypass the plugin itself. So there's the bypass button down here, or just the power switch would also bypass the plugin. Then to the next section is actually your undo and redo buttons, and in the middle is your history of the changes you've made to the plugin. So maybe you actually need to go back a few steps. Here is a small history of the moves you made with this plugin. And then on the bottom right is how much processing it's doing and how much of a task it is for your computer. You can see for me, with just this sitting on my mix bus, it's not doing anything. It's 1%. It's on. We'll get into the sounds in a little bit, but next we're going to check out Bus Force. This is a parallel processor, and it actually has a few different stages and parallel paths that you can enter into your signal. There's a lot going on, but you can really break it down into different sections. Looking along the top right is your different paths. So here's your dry path, and this is the standard signal feeding to the input of this plugin. Then you have your parallel compressor path and its adjustable volume. So these are your wet dry knobs. And then next is your saturation path. There's also an output trim because maybe you're pushing too much signal and you need to back it off. You can do that here, or you need to drive the input. That's on the top left. Underneath the input is the schematic or the signal path of what's currently happening. So right now on the left is your input, then here's your dry path, which branches off and just gives you that same signal to the output. This is a parallel processor, so there's your dry signal. There's nothing going on that. Then in our next path, as we can see here, it has the EQ going into the filter going into the compressor, and then that is continued out its own path to the output. But there's also a break off here. Post compressor goes to the saturation channel, and that has its own mix knob or output path volume. Right now we have the dry path and the compressor and equalizer paths muted, and everything is just going through the saturation path. This is the default. Also at the end is a clipper in case you need to actually do any clipping to your signal. And then underneath that are those different sections that we went over. The EQ controls are all the way on the left, the filter controls are in the middle, the compressor controls are towards the right, and then the saturation controls are on the far right. Now watch what happens when I start clicking on some parameters. Maybe on my overall mix bus, I do want to do some parallel processing, but I want my EQ to adjust my main mix. So I want this on my dry path. I can come to my dry path, unmute it so that it is feeding my output, and turn on the equalizer on the dry path. Watch the signal path over here. When I turn it on, now the input comes in, feeds directly into the EQ, and then branches off from there, feeding our dry output, and then the filter and compressor output, which then also feeds the saturation output. There's a lot going on. It seems confusing, but you can visually see what's happening where on the display on the left. But the display on the left doesn't always just show you your signal paths. When you start manipulating controls on bottom, it will change to that module. Let me show you. If I click on one control in the equalizer, I am now seeing a graphical representation of our EQ. Maybe you want a high shelf. Maybe you want a low shelf to get that nice smile curve. Maybe this isn't the correct curve, so you can adjust the curves here. Then maybe also you want to change where your center frequencies are on bottom. So now we're looking at our EQ. Moving over to our filter section, maybe you just want to get rid of that really low rumble. This way it's not feeding into the compressor. And maybe we take off some of those super highs, if that's something you need to do. Click on any control in the compressor. Now you're looking at the graphical representation of the compressor. And just like all the others, click on any control in the saturation module, and now you're looking at what's happening over here. So you can do a lot of parallel processing in this plugin. Then last but not least is the EQ Sitral-295. Here is just a very musical sounding, very simple EQ. Quickly going through everything, on the far left is your low cut. Next to that, the actual control knob is boost or cut. So if you push up with your mouse, you'll actually boost, pull down, and you'll cut your low end. And that's dictated by the toggle switch here. So 50 Hertz, 100 Hertz, or 300 Hertz. In the middle, or your presence band, same thing with the dB control, pushing up boosts, pulling down cuts. And you can select your frequency with this control here. Moving further along, just like our low end, here is our top end where you can add or cut your top end, dictated by the toggle switch here, which starts at 5K, goes to 10K, and all the way up to 30K past human hearing. And then your high cut selector all the way on the right here. On the right hand side is where you can adjust the controls of the EQ. You can put it into mid-side mode, enable or disengage auto gain, link your channels here. The range actually modifies the boost or cuts of the three different bands. At 1, it's whatever you're seeing on the display. So if you need to add 3 dB without affecting the range and going to the first selection, that's 3 dB at your selected frequency. If you only needed a little bit and you didn't need to go 3 dB, maybe you only needed to go 1.5, you can reduce your range down to 0.5, and it then does the math for you and will give you half of the number you have selected. In this case 3, it's getting us half, 1.5. If we go up to 6, then we're only getting 3. You can see where we're going here. And then there's the character switch, which goes through 2 different characters or sound models of this EQ. Instead of the advanced button, it has a visualizer, so you can actually see what you're doing with this EQ if you needed that graphical representation. And again, just like on the Comp Diode 609, you can turn on or off those stepped controls for this plugin. That's the breakdown of the controls of these 3 new plugins. Now we're going to mess around with Comp Diode 609 and Bus Force on this track that I have. I'm not going to be using EQ Sitral-295 just because it's not what I needed on this track, but we'll probably follow it up with another video. So I've dialed in some settings for the compressor already. I actually have 2 of these. I have one on my mix bus, and that's what we're looking at here, and I have one on my drum bus. So I'm doing a little bit more on my drum bus and just kind of kissing the needles on my mix bus. Let's take a listen to the before and after. So it's giving us just that little bit of Neve style glue that might be really good on your track. Like I said, I also did this on my drum bus, and here it is. I'll just make this a little bit bigger by going into the menu and scaling up the plugin. So here's what it's doing on my drum bus, which is a little bit more. Watch the gain reduction. So you saw I was a bit more heavy-handed on the drum bus with those kicks and snares getting about 4 dB of compression, and on our mix bus, half a dB, 1 dB, maybe up to 2 dB. Not doing nearly as much. Then we can follow this up with bus force, and for this one, I just want to open up some presets and see what kind of sounds we get by just scrolling through a few of them. So let's go in and into our dynamics, and instead of doing the 7K de-esser, there's no vocals on this right now, so it would just kind of cut down on our hi-hats and maybe some top end of our guitars. Let's start with crushed highs and clean lows, and then we'll go from here. Looking at the signal path, we're getting our dry signal with the EQ engaged, and it's done a little bit of work. The compressor path is muted, so we're not using the filters or the compressor, but it is feeding into the saturation path, which we are getting. So even though we're not getting a direct signal of the compressor path, what's happening in the compressor is feeding into the saturation path. I've put the plugin into bypass, and now let's listen to a little bit before, and then we'll engage it. So as you can see and hear, lots of different parallel processes happening within one plugin. So there you go. That's just a quick overview of some of the newest from Arturia in the FX Collection 2. This isn't just these 3 plugins though, it is everything else they do. So you have compressors, you have mic pre-emulations, you have time-based effects like choruses and flangers, all available to you in the FX Collection. Use the link in the description below to pick up your copy of FX Collection 2. That's all for now. If you found anything informative, please like and share the video. For more, visit timflansbaum.com, and if you have a question, ask it in the comments and I'll answer it in a future video. Thanks for watching.